From the very beginning of our lives, we are trained to seek approval. The child learns quickly that certain behaviors are rewarded with affection, while others are met with rejection. In this way, the psyche begins to fragment. We build a mask, what I have called the persona, to ensure that we remain acceptable to the world. But beneath that mask, hidden in the shadows, lies the part of ourselves that remains unseen and unacknowledged. When we live only for approval, we imprison ourselves in that mask, cut off from our own depths. Yet, when you cease to crave validation, everything changes. You encounter your true nature, confront the unconscious within you, and step into a life of authenticity and wholeness. From the earliest days of our existence, the hunger for approval begins shaping our very being. A child quickly learns that smiles, warmth, and affection are given when it behaves in ways pleasing to its parents, and that frowns, coldness, or punishment follow when it does not. Without realizing it, the child begins crafting a mask, a social identity designed not for truth but for acceptance. This is what I have called the persona, a necessary tool for navigating the demands of society, yet one that often becomes a prison when mistaken for the self. As we grow, this mask hardens. We learn to suppress impulses, desires, and even authentic thoughts that might draw disapproval. And instead, we act in ways calculated to win praise, admiration, or at least to avoid rejection. The tragedy lies in how easily we forget that this mask is not who we are but only a surface projection. In the pursuit of approval, we lose touch with the deeper layers of our psyche, the authentic voice within us that cries out for expression but is continually silenced by fear of judgment. The persona becomes so dominant that many live their entire lives without ever questioning it, mistaking their reflection in the eyes of others for their own essence. When you are bound to the search for approval, your every action is subtly manipulated by invisible strings. You choose not because it is what your soul longs for, but because you believe it will keep you safe, admired, or acceptable. Your career decisions, your relationships, even your tastes and opinions are molded to fit within the expectations of others. And though this may bring temporary comfort, it leads inevitably to a deeper emptiness. For what you gain in approval, you lose in authenticity. Approval can feed the ego, but it starves the soul. It is a counterfeit form of nourishment that leaves one restless, hollow, and forever seeking more. No amount of applause will ever heal the ache of not living in truth. Yet the moment you step away from this compulsion, everything changes. To release yourself from the tyranny of approval is to begin dismantling the persona. It does not mean abandoning it entirely, for the mask has its function in society, but it means ceasing to mistake it for the whole of who you are. You recognize that the true self is not defined by the shifting judgments of the crowd, but by the eternal depths within you. In this realization, a profound freedom emerges. You no longer bend your will to please others at the cost of your own integrity. You begin to speak with a voice that feels unmistakably your own, even if it is not always met with applause. This is the beginning of self-respect, the foundation upon which a genuine life can be built. To stop living for approval is to reclaim yourself from the prison of appearances, to tear away the mask and finally breathe in the air of your own reality. It is painful at first, for it often brings rejection, conflict, and misunderstanding. But what is gained is infinitely greater, the unshakable knowledge that you are living your truth, and that no mask, however polished, could ever replace the power of authenticity. The search for approval is not only a social instinct, but also a psychological defense mechanism against the terror of isolation. Deep within the psyche lies the primal fear of abandonment, the dread that if we reveal ourselves as we truly are, we will be cast out from the tribe, left alone to face the void of existence. This fear is ancient, woven into the very fabric of our biology, for survival once depended on belonging to the group. But in modern life, where survival no longer hinges upon the collective in the same way, This fear continues to dominate our choices, shaping us into creatures more concerned with being accepted than with being authentic. And yet, the paradox is that this fear breeds precisely the kind of loneliness it seeks to avoid. By hiding our true selves, we create relationships built not on truth but on illusion, and so even when surrounded by others, we feel unseen and unknown. Carl Jung warned that the repression of the true self does not make it disappear. It only drives it into the unconscious, where it festers and transforms into shadow. Every unspoken thought, every silenced impulse, every truth withheld from fear of rejection becomes a ghost that haunts the psyche. This is why so many who outwardly seem well, adjusted and successful inwardly experience profound anxiety, depression, or emptiness. They have traded authenticity for approval, and in doing so, they have betrayed their own soul. The shadow, born of this betrayal, grows more powerful the longer it is ignored, and eventually it demands recognition, often through crises, breakdowns, or sudden eruptions of behavior that seem foreign even to the individual themselves. When you constantly seek approval, you become a fragmented being, divided between the face you show to the world and the truth you conceal. The more you hide, the weaker your inner voice becomes, until you no longer know whether your desires are truly yours or merely the echoes of what others expect from you. This division creates an inner war, one side demanding safety through conformity, the other yearning for the liberation of authenticity. To live this way is to live in a state of spiritual exile, never at home in oneself, always dependent on the shifting winds of external validation. The only way to escape this cycle is to confront the fear of disapproval head-on, to recognize that while rejection may sting, it does not annihilate us, and that to lose the approval of others is a far lesser tragedy than to lose ourselves. Freedom comes not when the fear of isolation disappears, but when we are willing to face it without surrendering our integrity. For in truth, only by daring to be rejected can we discover who truly accepts us. And only by refusing to be defined by others do we begin to glimpse the depth of our own being. Approval seeking is, at its core, a surrender of power. When you live in constant anticipation of how others will respond to you, whether they will praise you, criticize you, accept you, or dismiss you, you hand them the keys to your inner world. They become the judges of your worth, and you become their subject. In such a state, freedom is impossible, for every choice, every gesture, every word is filtered through the imagined gaze of others. You do not act because your soul commands it. You act because you believe the crowd will applaud. And what greater slavery is there than to live as a puppet, pulled by invisible strings of opinion and expectation? Carl Jung understood this dynamic as a form of psychic imprisonment. To be ruled by the desire for approval is to be ruled by the collective psyche, the faceless mass of society with its norms, judgments, and unconscious drives. The individual who cannot free himself from this compulsion becomes a vessel for collective will rather than an authentic being in his own right. He may appear confident, charismatic, or successful, but beneath the surface his entire identity is fragile, propped up by the approval of others. The moment that approval is withdrawn, the structure collapses, and he finds himself in despair, unsure of who he truly is. The tragedy is that in seeking to secure respect from others through compliance, one often secures only their superficial regard. People may like the agreeable version of you that bends to their wishes, but they do not respect it, for respect is born not from submission but from strength. To be respected is to be recognized as someone who stands firm, who is not easily swayed, who has an inner axis around which their life revolves. When you constantly chase approval, you communicate to others, often unconsciously, that you are willing to abandon yourself for their validation. And while they may enjoy the power this gives them, it also diminishes their regard for you. They sense your dependence and treat you accordingly. True power, then, lies in withdrawing your need for approval and anchoring yourself in your own values, instincts, and convictions. This does not mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of others, but rather reclaiming sovereignty over your own inner life. When you no longer live to please, you create a presence that commands natural respect, for people instinctively recognize in you the rare quality of authenticity. You become someone who cannot be easily manipulated, someone who belongs not to the collective, but to themselves. And this, ultimately, is what Jung would call individuation, the birth of the true individual, no longer a mere mask for the crowd, but a fully realized self who acts from within rather than reacts to without. When you cease to seek approval, conflict often emerges. For people who have grown accustomed to your compliance suddenly find themselves facing resistance. They may accuse you of being selfish, arrogant, or difficult, not because you have wronged them, but because you have stepped out of the role they had written for you. Here lies a paradox of human relationships. The more you bend to satisfy others, the more they demand, but the moment you begin to assert yourself, they resist. Yet this very resistance is the sign that you are breaking free. Jung would argue that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, cannot occur without friction, for it requires separating yourself from the collective expectations that wish to absorb you. Conflict, then, is not something to be feared but embraced as a necessary companion of authenticity. When you abandon the pursuit of approval, you allow yourself to be honest, even if that honesty provokes discomfort in others. You stop disguising your thoughts, censoring your words, or hiding your desires for the sake of harmony. And while this may cause turbulence in your relationships, it also clears away the illusions upon which false connections rest. Only when people know where you truly stand can genuine respect and genuine intimacy arise. Anything else is merely a performance, a fragile peace maintained at the cost of your own soul. The courage to withstand disapproval is, in fact, the foundation of freedom. So long as you tremble before the possibility of others' rejection, you remain chained. But when you learn to endure the frowns, the gossip, and the judgments, you begin to see that they cannot harm you. Their power exists only to the degree that you grant it. The disapproval of others is like smoke. It appears dense and suffocating, but the moment you step through it, you find that there is nothing solid there. The only true danger lies in betraying yourself in order to escape it. Thus, freedom is not found in universal acceptance, but in the strength to be disliked. When you no longer depend on approval, you can act with clarity, integrity, and decisiveness. Your words gain weight because they are not crafted to flatter, but to express truth. Your presence gains force because it is not diluted by the shifting tides of opinion. And though some may resent this change, others will be drawn to it, for authenticity, even when it provokes, commands a respect that approval seeking never can. To accept conflict, therefore, is to accept the price of individuality, and in paying this price, you gain what is infinitely more valuable than applause, the possession of your own soul. Approval seeking is, at its root, an attempt to escape loneliness. When you strive constantly to gain the favor of others, it is often because you fear that, without their validation, you will be left isolated and unseen. Yet this very pursuit blinds you to the deeper truth, that loneliness cannot be conquered by external approval, only by reconciliation with yourself. Jung emphasized that many people project their unlived lives onto others, hoping that by pleasing them, they can find completion. But the shadow of this dependence always follows, for every smile you win from the crowd becomes a reminder that your sense of worth hangs upon something outside your control. The paradox is that the more you seek approval, the lonelier you become. For approval is conditional. It must be maintained, earned, and constantly reaffirmed. It is never final. The applause of yesterday is forgotten by tomorrow, and the more you chase it, the more fragile you feel, for your identity becomes a reflection of fleeting impressions. This fragility isolates you from others even as you strive to cling to them, because deep down you know that they do not truly see you. They see only the mask you present. The cost of constant approval is invisibility. When you stop seeking approval, however, you confront the loneliness directly. You no longer shield yourself with masks, nor do you distract yourself with endless performances. This confrontation can be painful, for it reveals the emptiness that lies beneath years of conformity. Yet it is only in this honest solitude that the possibility of genuine connection arises. For when you no longer depend on approval, you begin to value relationships not for the validation they provide, but for the authenticity they embody. You no longer ask, "Do they like me?" Instead, you ask, "Do they truly understand me, and do I truly understand them?" In this way, abandoning the pursuit of approval transforms loneliness from a curse into a teacher. It forces you to discover an inner ground of stability that cannot be taken away. The silence of solitude becomes the place where you learn to endure yourself, where you begin to integrate the parts of your psyche that you once repressed in order to be acceptable. And from this inner integration arises a new strength, one that does not collapse when others turn away. Thus, the end of approval seeking is not isolation, but the beginning of authentic communion. For only when you have learned to stand alone can you meet another as an equal, without clinging, without performing, without begging for validation. And it is precisely then, when you no longer fear rejection, that you find yourself capable of the deepest form of intimacy, the meeting of two whole individuals, neither enslaved by the other's opinion. At the heart of approval seeking lies a hidden danger, the gradual loss of authenticity. When a person builds their life around being liked, admired, or accepted, they inevitably begin to censor their thoughts, dilute their desires, and reshape their personality into something palatable to others. It begins subtly. You hold back a thought in fear of judgment. You soften a conviction to avoid conflict. You exaggerate kindness to ensure affection. But over time, these small concessions accumulate until the self you present to the world is no longer the self you truly are. This disconnection is profoundly destructive, for it robs life of meaning. Carl Jung warned that every act of suppression plants a seed in the unconscious, and what is denied on the surface does not disappear, it festers in the depths of the psyche. The more you silence your true nature in pursuit of approval, the stronger your shadow becomes. Resentment builds, aggression simmers, and anxiety grows, for you are forced to maintain a mask that feels heavier with each passing day. The smile you show to others is often not a reflection of joy, but a defense mechanism, a shield against the terror of rejection. And in this way, the quest for approval does not lead to peace, but to psychological imprisonment. The tragedy is that those who live for approval rarely notice their loss until it is too late. They may seem successful, respected, even admired, but inwardly they are hollow, for their lives were never truly their own. They spent their days serving the expectations of others, molding themselves into shapes that fit into society's molds. And when they finally turn inward, they discover an unbearable emptiness, for the authentic self has been ignored for so long that it feels like a stranger. To stop seeking approval, then, is to risk being misunderstood, rejected, even disliked. But this risk is the very condition of freedom, for in daring to reveal your authentic self, you also open the possibility of being seen and loved as you truly are, not as the mask you constructed. Authenticity may narrow the number of people who accept you, but it deepens the quality of those connections, and most importantly, it restores wholeness to your life. Jung believed that the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming who you are, requires this very act of courage. You must be willing to lose approval in order to gain authenticity. For every person who disapproves of your truth, there will be another who resonates with it. And even if there is no one, you will at least have yourself, unbroken, unmasked, and real. To live authentically is not easy, but it is the only life worth living. When a person finally releases the chains of approval seeking, something remarkable begins to unfold within them, a deep, unshakable sense of inner authority. No longer are they swayed by the fleeting judgments of others, no longer enslaved by the shifting winds of social validation. Instead, they root themselves in their own convictions, in the voice of the inner self that Jung so often described as the guide toward individuation. To walk this path is to discover that freedom is not granted by society, nor bestowed by admiration, but arises from the capacity to stand firm in your own truth, regardless of the consequences. This transformation is not a sudden revolution, but a gradual awakening. At first, one feels the pull of old habits, the need to justify, to explain, to win over doubters. Yet with time, the individual begins to see that the opinions of others are like shadows on a wall, ever shifting, never stable, and ultimately meaningless in the larger scheme of life. Approval, once seen as the air necessary for survival, is revealed as an illusion, a fragile construct that collapses under the weight of self-realization. In its place emerges a new foundation, an inner stability that cannot be taken away. The beauty of this liberation is that it paradoxically attracts respect in its purest form, for people are instinctively drawn to those who are not begging for their validation. They recognize strength in independence, even if they cannot always articulate it. And while some may respond with resentment or envy, others will respond with admiration and trust. The individual who no longer craves approval becomes unpredictable, untouchable, and therefore powerful, because their actions are guided by inner necessity rather than external reward. This is why Jung emphasized that individuation is not simply a psychological process but a moral act, a declaration of sovereignty over one's own life. To live authentically is to accept that conflict, misunderstanding, and rejection will come, but to also know that these are small prices to pay for the immeasurable gift of self-respect. And once this self-respect is firmly rooted, no insult, no dismissal, no lack of recognition can destroy it. The individual is no longer tossed about like a leaf in the storm of collective opinion, but stands as a tree with roots deep in the earth of their own being. In the end, to stop seeking approval is to reclaim your life. It is to shift from being a mirror reflecting the desires of others to becoming a flame that burns with its own light. And while that flame may not illuminate everyone, it will shine brightly enough to reveal the path of authenticity, freedom, and inner peace.